him about. The Saints are not going to give you any wrinkles or anything that, that they're working on or doing. So I think it's been going a typical what you get from coaches in training camp, in terms of he seems to be pleased with the performance of a lot of the younger players and the rookies and some of the veterans. So I just have not heard him say not much in terms of anybody that, in which he probably would not say anyway publicly, which I wouldn't do that publicly either. You keep that private. If you have any, players that are not doing so well, you don't really give that to the media. So that I am proud of him that he protects his players. So everything I have heard from Coach has been positive about the players. As we're on the air, I'm trying to see if there's any new press. So as I'm going back and forth from doing the show, I'm just trying to make sure. And the latest I just got was that there was a little concern for Nick and somebody they thought might have got a little nick, but they don't think it's serious because it was on Saturday, but he was back in practice, so they don't think it was a serious injury.
Nick Fairley? Yeah.
Fairley.
Right.
And that's the thing about him I said before. With him, you have to watch him in terms of injuries. I don't think Coach Payton is going to if I was him, this is just me, BB and Kyle. When it comes to Keenan Lewis, Nick Fairley, Sheldon Rankins, a lot of my starters, and I hear a lot of these coaches now protecting them for safety so they don't get hurt in preseason. I would go very, not easy, but lightly on them. Now, Keenan Lewis has to get back in shape so I can see him with a but I would Willie Snead, Brandon Cooks, Michael Thomas, these kind of guys, once after, they've got their gel down and you see that, boom, I would not press too much on my starters during these training camps because there are too many freak accidents and injuries that are occurring with these players. And it's just me.
Okay. All right. It makes sense. It makes sense what you're saying, Professor. You don't want to really have any devastating injuries that's going to plague the team and hurt the team's chances in the season up to come. BB, as far as Andrus Peat was concerned, he addressed the fact that he was more conditioned than he was his rookie season. Do you think that's really going to make a really good impact for this guy? Because a lot of people have been saying, especially if I read correctly, Mike Triplett of ESPN thought he is having the best training camp out of all of the Saints players.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Mike Triplett said that he was the scout player of the week in terms of training camp, that he's making really good strides in his progression. You got to remember that he's still young. He's a second-year player, but the one thing that we got when he came out of college was they said he had the best legs in terms of offensive lineman, that he was set under the belt in terms of strength from the lower body, which is very, very important in terms of offensive line. I believe last week we talked a little bit about his upper body strength, that he's really been able to just put some meat on his arms and is now able to throw some guys around. He's had a really good training camp. And I think the biggest thing for Pete is, where is he going to play? We've had reports that he's still competing for that right tackle spot with Streif. I've heard reports that he's going to be playing right guard. But no matter where he plays, I think exactly what he said is true, that the extra conditioning, not having to go through the draft process, and really being able to focus in on teamwork and being here at training camp with a completely different mindset than last season is going to make all the difference for him.
Yeah, because right now he is a critical component on the offensive line for the New Orleans Saints. Your former number one draft choice. We need to have you in one way, shape, or form. If it's at right tackle, like you said, or at guard, I think he's more comfortable at tackle versus guard. Either way, we need to have this kid. And if he's performing and being able to absorb what is being given to him from Sean Payton and the line coach, it really is going to bode well for the New Orleans Saints. You know, the flexibility and the versatility is one thing that you're starting to see is going to be very crucial for both offensive as well as defensive line, Professor. You know, we have Lolito. He can play guard. He can play center as well. We have Armstead, which is going to be just our stud at left tackle. So let's rest him until he gets 100%. And we have Max Unger. You know, he's going to be a really positive force for us. But Clemente, we can't overlook how he's been performing pretty well as well. So we have some guys on our offensive line who are really flexible pieces of the puzzle that is going to really bode well for the Saints. But that defensive line, man, we can't overlook that maybe the Saints are building a pretty good defense.
Yeah, I like I said, 2017 is my benchmark. I expect, improvement this year, but next year I look for the Saints defense to be a top 12 because everybody on that defense is eligible to come back in 2017. They'll be their third year together, a lot of them with the exception of the new additions at linebacker. And then they have some two players that they need to keep, and if they don't make the 53 roster, they need to be on the practice squad is the center Allen from Michigan and Landon Turner right up the road from where BB's from. The Saints need to keep those guys. Those two guys, because Zach Street, this may be Zach Street's last year. You need to have a qualified backup for Unger, and so the Saints they've got a lot of raw talent. Is now the key, BB and Kyle, is how do you get the coaching to be able to motivate and teach these guys to understand what Dennis Allen is trying to convey on defense? Offense not so difficult to say as long as Drew is there, but on defense, if they can pick up the message that Dennis Allen is conveying, interpret it, understand it, and then, as I've always stated, in their private time, you make a decision. Am I going to watch TV, play video games, go to clubs, or am I going to do the extra hours to make me become a talented all-pro Pro Bowl on this team? I feel what is happening to a lot of football players is that it's become more monetary than discipline. Coach Payton is looking for discipline. Mm-hmm. So in a city like New Orleans, which is very, very celebratory, always something to do, always a lot to do, always having events, festivals, mm-hmm. They've got to be disciplined enough to say, you know what? Even when we finish, I'm going to the film room, or I'm going out on the field. I'm going to steal a little extra and practice some things.
You know what? Can I interrupt you right there? One thing that surprised me when they had their day off, and BB, if you listen to the Bobby Richardson interview on WWL, he said he stayed in bed and rested and watched 3 hours of film. I thought that was pretty cool. That's a guy that looks like he's pretty focused.
That is what needs to happen because the NFL career is very short now. It's short. It is not like it was, Kyle, when we started watching football back in the 70s and the 80s where you had most of the players became greater in their 30s. Now it's the reversal. You got to be great by the time you're 23 or 24 or you out of this league by the time you're 26. The lifespan for an NFL player now has gotten much shorter. So my encouraging words to any football players that are listening to the sound of my voice, whether you're playing in Pee Wee League, Biddies, junior high, middle school, if you want to be a great football player, and this goes for any sports, my dad was a coach, baseball coach. If you want to be an expert or great at your craft, and this goes for anything in life, I'm an accountant, and I know my craft because I stay up learning the new laws, the IRS laws, and everything, so that if a client calls me, I don't have to go flip open a book. I don't have to go turn on the internet. I can tell you from my head, this is what this law is, this was expected with your finances. If you want to be great at anything, I give you a prime example. This young man that's on the air with us, Brendan Boylan, and what he's doing. You know, you have to, whatever it is, young people, that you are desiring to do, you must put in the time after the job hours are over, after the practice is over, in order for you to be great at it. I would like to see the New Orleans Saints younger players, and there are a lot of them. Drew and Zach are the old heads on offense. You've got to put in the hours after the hours in order for this team to execute, because you don't have the same amount of practices as they had in Otis. And that's another reason why usually the first month of football, I don't like football in September, because it's still like an extension of preseason. It's just so sloppy, especially those first 2 weeks. The teams was, if you look back last year, the Saints did not gel on offense till about game after the Philadelphia game. They did not gel for them first 5 games. And that's another, area that many people miss. When they lost, they were 1-4. That was not all the defense. I'm going to keep saying that. The Arizona game, the Tampa Bay game, that was not. The Philadelphia game was the defense.
Well,
those first 2 games, that wasn't the defense. That offense did not gel.
Well, and that's fine, Professor, but let's go back to training camp right now. And let's talk about that, man, because the important thing right now is for the listeners to understand that these battles that's happening right now in training camp are important battles that we need to pay attention to. And we talk – go ahead.
I want to ask you, but Kyle, what I'm saying, why it all ties in, because they do not practice. They don't have – this is why I said what happened last year. It all ties in. If you don't have the practices you had back in the day, you're not going to be great by game 1 unless you do some extra in your private time. You
right.
simply only have 30 training camp sessions. That's it.
Right.
Back in the 70s and 80s, they had 2-3 a day, which led to 90 tests. So young players are not going to learn and pick up everything just through train. It's just not going to happen like that.
Right.
There are a few that come out. So if they could take the discipline and get together themselves like Bobby Richardson did, study film and do those disciplines, then you'll advance yourself a lot quicker, and we won't have the errors in the month of September. That's all I'm saying. We cannot afford to get out to another 0-2, 0-3, 1-3, 1-4. You cannot get out to that start. When the Saints start like that, they're 7-9, and that's 8-8.
Okay.
That's all I wanted to say. Why it all ties together.
Okay. Good. And you know what? I really appreciate the fact that you, Professor, when I send out memos about how to keep short comments, you really do a great job.
No, I don't do it. I'm a professor. I'm a teacher. You and BB are the students. Never forget that the teacher who's the teacher here. BB, you have to remind Kyle, he is the student when the professor's on. It seems I got to put him back in first grade because he obviously needs to go and do a timeout. So, let me shut up because we're on the air. I can't say what I want to say. So go ahead and talk to BB. I want to listen to BB. I want to hear my son talk.
Okay. All right, man. BB.
37 years I've had to put up with this, BB.
All right, player. Look, man, we're going to talk about the Saints offensive squad. Let's listen in to Ellaby and Mark Ingram before we wrap everything up and talk about these guys. Hold on 1 second.
Couple of roster announcements.
No, we don't want to hear the roster announcements, so we're going to hold off on that. BB, talk to me a little bit about your thoughts on the Saints. I mean, the Saints have 6 really, really good running backs right now. And I know on last week we talked about how these guys can how this all can possibly shape out. And Sean Payton talked about Lasco today in his press conference and how dynamic the young man could be, not only on the offensive set, but also on the